right, and we are live.
Great, thank you, Patrice. Are we recording?
I'm just waiting for it to show. I usually hear an echo of myself when I know we're set.
I wasn't rushing you. I was just
okay. Oh, now we're live. Now I heard my echo. I'm about to hit the record button, and we're now recording.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I want to call to order the MAPC Executive Committee meeting for Wednesday, May 29th, 2024. This meeting is being conducted remotely via Zoom video conference consistent with Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, which includes an extension until March 31st, 2025 of the remote meeting provisions of former Governor Baker's Executive Order of March 12th, 2020, which suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Please keep in mind, if you choose to share your screen, and I hope you do, we can see you. So just be aware of that. We are currently being recorded and also streamed on YouTube. And with that, I'm going to call the order, in the attendance. So if everyone could come off mute, I'd appreciate it. Here we go. Imai.
Present.
Colette.
Here.
Kurt.
Present.
Keith.
Present.
Karen.
Here.
Jen Constable.
Here.
Tom Daniel.
Here.
John DePriest. Tom. Mo.
Here.
Sagoon. Jared.
Yeah, right until they return them. Yeah.
Tabor.
Yeah, that makes
Here.
Angie. Gina. Steve O.
Here.
Courtney. Vandana.
Present.
Claire.
Here.
Sam.
Here.
Steve Silvera.
Here.
Juan.
Present.
Elaine.
Here.
And Erin. Present. What a good showing today. Great job, everyone. Thank you so much. All right, next on the agenda is the approval of minutes from April 24th, 2024. Are there questions or comments on this? Okay, great. So at this time, I'm going to ask for a motion to put this item on the consent agenda.
So move. Second.
Motion made by Mo to put this on the consent agenda with a second made by Imai. Thank you so much.
Can I ask you a question, Erin, about that?
Sure.
I have to abstain because I wasn't at that meeting, so I just, when you're doing the consent agenda, just to bear that in mind.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know, Colette. Okay, next up is the treasurer's report. Take it away, Treasurer Sam.
Thank you, President Erin. Hello, everybody. Sam Seidel, Treasurer. We've got two items on today's agenda. The first, we're going to look at the March 2024 income statement very quickly, but we'll go through that. And then we're going to dive into the FY25 budget for your review and hopefully for your approval to the full council. But what we're going to start with is the March 2024 income statement. And I only want to note here that we're in March in this income statement. So we're a couple of months out from the end of the year, which is obviously June 30th. And the thing that we're always tracking is the overhead rate. And that's our little sort of quick temperature gauge of how everything is going as it relates to the budget that we set out earlier in the year. And I'll just note that you'll notice for the month of March, the overhead rate is 109.9, which is well below our approved overhead rate of 123%. That 109.9% means that cumulative for the year, we're at 119.8%. Those are down at the bottom looking left to right. 119.8 is still below the 123%, but we had a chance to review it and talk it over, and there are one reason for the low in March which is that March has a lot of working days in it. So there's a lot of direct labor that gets billed during the month of March, and that tends to drive down the overhead rate because administrative costs sort of stay the same, but direct labor goes up. That explains it, but we also think we will be fine when we get to the end of the year. There's plenty of bills that are still coming in for the end of the year, and those should drive up our administrative costs and get us right about where we want to be, which is 123%. That pretty much covers the March 2024 income statement. If there are any questions, please ask. If not, I would entertain a motion to put this on consent agenda, and then we could dive into the FY25 budget.
So moved.
So
Okay,
if I
let's-
could, I would just note, the income statement does not need to be voted. It's the treasurer's report that needs to be
Oh.
adopted. So since I assume we are going to adopt the budget through a separate vote, not the consent agenda, there is, you know, we can do that separately, and then someone can make a motion if they wish to adopt the treasurer's report and to put that on the consent agenda. That would be the proper way to handle it.
That works for me, if that works for everybody. So, Mark, hearing that, I assume that means I can go right into the FY25 budget and dig right into those numbers. How does that sound?
Sam, would you mind if I made a few very brief preliminary remarks?
No, not at all.
You
Please-
and with
please do.
Aaron?
Please do.
Okay. So I want to start off by thanking Anna Cole and her team, as well as the finance committee, which consists of Sam, Tabor, and Yolanda, for a tremendous amount of work and thought and care that went into the development of this annual budget. It's always a heavy lift, and all of the other activities of the agency that finance is responsible for do not miraculously vanish during the months of March, April, and May when this is being done. There are a few things I would note about this upcoming budget. One is our numbers continue to increase. The budget is much, much larger than it was even several years ago. It is important to remember that most of that increase is not with operating expenses. Most of it is with projects and pass-through revenue. So while there are exceptions, for the most part, the increases are a result of doing more work, having more projects, having more programs that are funded by a variety of agencies or funders, including a lot of money that is passed through. We know that, you know, a lot of public health money, a lot of Homeland Security money, and now several programs that we operate for BAR, like accelerating climate resistance, and what we used to call COVID safe cooling, and which I think we now call safe cooling, are largely pass-through programs, and they contribute to for a substantial amount of the increase. Another thing I'd like to note, I'm going to note three things as usual. The second thing is that you know, you will see as you go through this that some of the funds, one of the line items that looks like it's for benefits, in fact, looks like it's going down, but in fact, the benefits are increasing. It was a very high priority for Lizzie and me this year. I think it's fair to say our highest budgetary priority was to try and improve the caliber of benefits to our staff, not only to be fair and modern in those benefits, but also to help with the retention of staff. Last year, we started this process with a separate line item that was focused on expanding benefits. During last year, we didn't actually spend all of those, but now we have made more decisions, not yet our final decisions, but more decisions about improvements to benefits, and we have incorporated them in the overall budget. That is why the individual line item on benefits might look like it's going down, but in reality, we are improving the benefits to our staff, which we think is a very, very important goal, and which we will continue to work on, frankly, over the course of the next several years. It doesn't happen all at once. The last thing I'll note is that there is a few percentage point increase in our overhead rate this year. That is largely a result of that very same thing, but also the requirement to hire additional staff as we become a larger agency. We are probably adding about 10 positions next year. There are different ways to count the positions, whether they're really new or really retention, but it's around 10. And I think about 7 of those are fully program staff and about 3 of those are overhead. Even when you add 3 overhead staff people, it is, it's still an impact on the overhead budget. And that plus the improvement in benefits is one of the reasons why our overhead rate has gone up. We are still lower than many regional planning agencies in Massachusetts. So we expect no difficulty in getting MassDOT to approve that overhead rate. So those are just a few high-level items that I wanted to mention, and I'll turn it back over to Sam.
Thank you, Mark, and that pretty much concludes the treasurer's report. I want to thank you all. No. But the main points are sort of the 30,000-foot view where I was going to start with my comments, which unsurprisingly sound a lot like what you just heard, except you just heard it with greater detail. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at the summary budget, then we'll look at some of the revenue numbers so you get a sense of where the money's coming from. And then we'll look at the expenditure budget, and that will conclude the report on this upcoming budget. So why don't we start with the summary budget? I think it's coming up on your screen right now. And I'm just giving, this is 30,000 foot. It's sort of top line numbers. But the point that you just heard is really a point that's hard to avoid, hard to miss. If you look at the page, you see the description on the left-hand side. Then you look at the FY24, the next column over is the FY24 mid-year budget. That's what we did about 6 months ago. And then the middle column with the yellow box at the top is what we're considering today. And I'll only make the point at the very top of that page. We look at total revenue overall. The number we're putting forward today is $28,411,000. That's up $3.2 million from just 6 months ago, or 13%, which is really pretty astounding, I have to say. At least that's my assessment of it. If you go down one line, we're at the non-staff project costs. That's the pass-through money. That's money that comes in and then goes right back out. The number in this budget is $13,700,000. That's up $2 million from 6 months ago. And then the net available for internal operations in this budget is $14.6 million, or up $1.2 million from just 6 months ago. So those are really astounding increases of 13%, 17%, 9%. Really large growth over roughly speaking, a 6-month period. If you go down the page a little bit, we're in the internal operating expense. We're going to delve into expenses a little bit later in our discussion, so I won't spend any time on that now. I'll only point out that our increase to fund balance is strong and healthy. It continues to be, and that's because we have a lot of work lined up. We park that money until we can get to the work, and interest rates are high, so it generates a certain amount of money for us. And it puts us at the end of the day at the overhead rate of 125%, 1.25, which is, as you just heard from Mark, from the director, it's a little higher than where we were, and it's a little higher than where we've been traditionally, but it does relate back to that effort to address the issue of how do you attract and maintain the talented workforce that MAPC absolutely requires. I mean, the work is out there, as we can see from these numbers, but you got to keep the staff happy and working hard, and benefits is one of the ways of addressing that. So that's the summary budget. If there are any questions on that, please feel free to ask. If not, we'll move on to the revenue numbers, and we could look at those now. So where's this money coming from? And if we can, maybe we'll switch over our screen. And I don't know if you've got that, but we could switch over.
If you would allow me to just note one quick item on the summary budget.
Yes,
I just
please.
want everybody to be clear that the increase in fund balance is not a negative number. It's just that it's anticipated to be a tad less this year than it was last year. It is still very high because of interest rates, as Sam pointed out. Usually we see an increase in fund balance that's around $40,000 to $60,000, but it's more than that during this temporary period of high interest rates. It's not going to be a negative to fund balance. It's just not going to be quite as high as it was.
Yes, and we'll have another moment where a negative is actually a positive later on, but we'll get to that at the end of our discussion. When we get to
If I could, can I ask a question before we move off this page?
Sure.
Yeah. Please.
Just one clarification, one question. I think I understand from what you've said that the pass-through is basically where we get money from agencies that we then grant directly to someone else to do some work, and so that's the pass-through. And so even given that, the fact that that money is increasing is something that MAPC should be proud of. I mean, do we have some role in this of generating this more money that's coming in that we then directly grant out? So I'm assuming that a 17% increase in that line item is something we should be pretty proud of.
Uh,
I'll let Mark or somebody, if they want to address that.
I'm very proud of it. You know, it mostly goes to cities and towns.
Yep.
And you'll note that, you know, it's 17% increase in pass-through and only a 9% increase in operating. So that's a pretty efficient ratio. And that's what leads to the overall increase in total revenue of 13%.
Okay. And then can you just remind me again, Sam, what's the actual calculation of the overhead rate? Which number is being divided by which number? How do you get to that calculation?
Yeah, so it's the relationship of direct labor and total indirect expenses. So it's indirect expenses over direct labor gives you the percentage of what is quote unquote an administrative expense versus what's a direct labor expense. A direct labor expense is billed out to a client, and an administrative expense is borne by the agency itself, basically.
Okay, so in this page right here, it's the 7.9 million divided by the 6.3 million.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes. And that
Thank
gets you to 125. That number. That.
And I just checked it. It actually does. So
All right.
So I did it too. One of those things.
I saw the way this was going, and I was
Okay.
worried someone would get the ratio wrong.
It's
Completely
one
right.
thing. One of the many things I learned from Tabor is always check the math.
Check your numbers. I as an auditor in a past life, I can't help myself, and so I'm banging away in my calculator, and I'm like, I can't quite get to that. But anyway, I appreciate it, and I should have known that. But anyway, it's okay to ask. Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. So that gets us through the summary budget. Then maybe we could look at the revenues.
Okay. Yep.
And I'll just start by saying, as we pull up the revenue numbers, that we last year we went to basically a summary sheet for revenues. The revenue sheet, when it's enumerated in a spreadsheet, is now so long that we've decided to sort of do broad groupings of income assets, if you will. And that will sort of tell you the broad story of where the revenue is coming from. And if you have more specific questions, I know Anna has all the details that you could want. Just wondering if we could pull that up. What we're going to start with is local grants and contracts up the top. And you'll see you actually have on the right-hand column, again, or let me start this way. On the left-hand column are our broad categories. The next column over is what we did, where we were 6 months ago at the mid-year budget. Then in this sheet, we do the increase or decrease in that middle column. And then the true middle column, the FY25 revenue budget, that's what's proposed in this budget. And then at the far right, you see another column of numbers, revenue deferred to the out years. So within all of those, there's actually a lot of information about what's going on here. I think where I'll start is in that first group of local grants and contracts, local technical assistance. And you see on the right-hand column, the MBI digital equity contract. That's the description of what's going on here. That's all the digital equity work that MAPC has been doing. And you'll see that in the increase-decrease column, from the mid-year to this budget, it's a proposed $1.9 million increase of revenue coming in for work in digital equity. And that just shows, A, the commitment on the part of the state towards the program, but also their trust in MAPC to do this work. And then if we stay on that same local technical assistance, the MBI digital equity work, you'll see that there's $8 million in the out years. So this is really a pretty astounding program that's going on, and it's all going to get run through MAPC, which is really very impressive, I have to say. If we go down to state grants and contracts, let's go to the first line, DLTA and other state contracts. DLTA, we all know, I think of it as a fairly consistent year-to-year contracting process, but you'll notice that the increase in that line is about north of 50%, almost 60%, $600,000 increase. Now, the explanation for that is DLTA plus DLTA augmentation. But even still, that's an impressive number that's going to be the increase for this year's proposed budget. If we stay in that general category of state grants and contracts, I'll pull out public health. So if we go down about 5 lines to public health, you'll see that's a negative number. That's down $328,000. That's an interesting number from an accounting perspective, and I'm going to describe it, and anybody else or anybody at Mark can chime in. Basically, the state sends money over for public health work. MAPC gets ready to do the work, but if the state isn't then at that point ready to go forward with that work, the money then goes back to the state for the next fiscal year, for the next budgeting year. And that explains in part what's going on with that negative 328. It doesn't mean that the public health work is disappearing. It just means that it's not going to happen at the same amount that was originally projected going back. The federal grants and contracts at the very bottom of the page, that's actually a very small number. And Ann and I had a long conversation about this. There's a lot of other money in this revenue sheets that you're looking at that actually it starts its day in the federal government. It works its way down to the state, and then it works its way to MAPC. But this is this 31,000 increase is about a federal highway grant for safe streets. If we look at the next page, we're into foundations, foundation support and others. And you see the Barr Foundation is also a negative number. And you'll see in the description on the right-hand side, that's really due to pushing that money to the out years. So you'll see in the deferred for future FYs, we're at 2.7 million. So Barr obviously has been a very strong supporter of MAPC over the years. It continues to be. We just don't expect to get to this amount of work in this fiscal year. So that's been pushed out. And that gets us to a total revenue, as you see in the center column in the yellow box, 28,411,748, which is the same number we saw on the summary sheet. That covers the projected revenue for this budget, and entertain any questions on that. If not, let's move on to the expenditure budget at this point.
Aaron, would it be all right if I clarified a couple of points?
It's okay here.
I think Aaron is nodding. Okay. Folks, just 2 things to amplify what Sam said, both on the previous page. Anna, if you could go back to the first page of the revenue budget. So Imai asked, what is DLTA augmentation, which is also affectionately known as DLTAA? It is the Commonwealth's unabashed effort to take every horrible acronym and turn it into an even worse acronym. The augmentation money is additional resources that the Commonwealth has provided to regional planning agencies so they can assist their cities and towns in applying for other state or federal grants, mainly because of the large number of federal grants available to communities, to regional agencies, to the Commonwealth, and the difficulty of navigating that application process. As Norm correctly points out, we have chosen to create our own acronym for DLTAA, and that is GAP, or the Grant Assistance Program. That is now part of the DLTA appropriation, or it's kind of a next door appropriation. Elaine is shaking her head. It's sort of a next door appropriation within the budget. It's covered under the same contract with the Commonwealth, but it is a separate amount of money. And that's, I don't expect it will last forever, but it's going to last for at least one more year. And in this budget process, we are trying to make sure that the words state grants, which were initially removed, will be restored. And we're hopeful that will happen in this budget process, so we can assist our cities and towns, not only in applying for federal money, but also for state money. Second and last point on this page is about public health. We've often seen with these mega grants that come to us from state departments that the state departments aren't necessarily ready with the regs and processes that would enable us to spend the money as quickly as they give it to us. So, this happened for a while with the Homeland Security money, even though they are now much more up to date. And it's happening as well with the DPH money post-COVID. They are giving it to us again. We have more than enough money to use. And in fact, I signed that contract just yesterday. And it was honestly, it's a massive contract. As you can see, those funds, the Homeland Security money under public safety and the various public health monies from DPH under public health, those are by far the largest items in our state contract. So nobody needs to be worried that those are disappearing or that we aren't able to continue and in fact increase our work in both of those areas.
Thank you, Mark. Always good to get that level of understanding of what's happening here. So thank you. At this point, I think if there are no other questions, we should go on to the expenditure budget, which is the last portion of what we're looking at. And that would be the money that we're planning on spending in this budget, in the FY25 budget. And I don't know if we can pull that up on the screen, just so you can have a look at that. And you'll see increases in the expenditure budget, but that's appropriate in the sense that we're going to have a whole lot. Part of this is we're going to have a whole lot of staff that's slated to be hired. Some of those will be administrative staff. And there's also this effort that you've heard about now a couple of times to increase, or if I can even say right size the benefit package for every employee so that they find MAPC not only a great place to do great work, but a great place to stay and keep working. Because as we've noted many times in many conversations, it's not like the old days where you might get a job and stay in it for 30 years. That typically doesn't happen anymore. So it's harder to get that competitive package that makes it a great place to continue to stay. But if we look at the expenditures, you'll notice top line numbers is administrative salaries. So these are all the indirect costs. These are not the direct costs. Those are done separately and those bill out directly to the clients. But these are the indirect costs. Administrative salaries, and then the non-direct portion of a direct salaries, direct staff. So, and we see an increase there, a total number of $3,078,000, which is an increase of $549,441. And then right below that, the employees' benefits. And this gets to that whole conversation that I was just talking about, we've heard about many times in the PTO, the paid time off. And that's an effort to just make the idea of being at MAPC just even that much better. But it does result in an increase of $197,000 in employee benefits, and that should be noted. If we go into the subsection below that of employee benefits, I just want to pull out right about middle of the way down, there's employee benefit improvement. And that's the number that Mark was talking about earlier, where at the mid-year budget last year, it was $140,000. At this budget, we have it listed at $102,000. But that's because a portion of that has been reallocated to that line above employees' benefits and the paid time off. It's not that there's an actual reduction. It's just that money is re-understood in terms of where it belongs in this budget. Right below that is professional development, and this is maybe a better, more obvious indication of what MAPC is trying to do. It was budgeted at 50,000 6 months ago. It's now up to 93,000. It's just giving employees more opportunities to become better employees, work on their professional development. And that's part of the budgetary commitment that the agency is making there. Transit subsidy, those numbers are actual based on what's been observed. And that's where that number, that $13,000 increase comes in. And out-of-state travel below that in the travel subsection, that's understood more as professional development. So that number has just been moved around in the spreadsheet. And then if we go down to the bottom section, operational services, we'll just look at facilities. That number's up by 118,000. That's, I'm going to broadly categorize that as our rent. That's having an office in downtown Boston and the increases associated with that. Information technology, a couple of lines down, also sees a fairly large increase of 178,000. That is both because more has been spent on IT and actual working, but we've also reallocated a lower line, subscriptions and publications, into the IT budget. So that's been moved up. You see the subscriptions line has been zeroed out, that 80,000, but that's been moved up into IT. And then let's see what else. Professional services and temporary help. That's dropped down by 175,000. The reason for that is some of that temporary help has now become full-time help within the total budget and the total expenditure. So that it no longer shows up as a temporary help line item. And then we'll go down just to the bottom, I think just to the very bottom, and we'll look at both the interest fees, which stay steady at $1,000, and then the less administrative transfer payments. And this is where I was joking that in a way, a negative is a positive. This is the money that CTPS pays us to help support them on their administrative work. And you see the numbers actually gone up. It's weird. It registers as a negative number because we're receiving the money instead of spending the money. But the money's gone up, and that's because CTPS itself is a bigger organization and has more going on. It leads to a total expenditure number of $7,985,764, or an 11% increase of $792,499, which all shows up on that summary sheet. And all of these numbers together get us to that 125% overhead rate, which we feel comfortable with and feel is appropriate for the work and the investments that are scheduled out in this budget. That concludes the treasurer's. Any discussions, comments, thoughts, queries?
I'll make a few comments if that's okay.
Yes, please.
So on the expenditure budget, I'd like people to know that the categories being used for last year's budget and the mid-year budget were exactly the same expenditure categories that were in existence in 2002 when I arrived here. And I suspect they were the same as the ones being used in the late 1960s. We decided this year that we were going to try and modernize and better define the expenditure categories so they actually made sense in today's world, and that our staff was clearer in understanding what the different categories were, enabling especially our directors and managers to be able to make sure that expenses were charged to the proper codes in the right categories. That's why Sam indicated on several occasions that certain amounts had been moved from one place to another. This is going to be a little bit of a tracking challenge this year, because we'll see if we got the moves done exactly right. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little more volatility in these categories this year than there has been in the past, as we're learning exactly how to define all of these categories properly and we'll balance that out again next year. It's not that we'll spend more money than we have, it's just that we might be in one category rather than another, because this particular expense translates better into this category than that category. On the benefits side, I want people to be aware of some of the changes we've made. Last year, one of our big benefit changes was to go from paid FMLA of 4 weeks to 6 weeks. This year, one of the main changes we're making is to eliminate the 2-week minimum vacation for all new employees and replace it with a 3-week minimum vacation for all employees. We have also bowed to reality, something we rarely do at MAPC, and we are now granting the day after Thanksgiving as a holiday for everybody. So those all result in increased PTO, paid time off, and we think that that's appropriate and consistent with our competitors. We are still looking very actively at benefit issues. Angela and Lizzie have established a benefits committee of the staff that is looking at this. We're doing this jointly with CTPS. And some of the things we're looking at going forward are, first of all, whether or not there should be any vacation increases for more senior members of the staff. Second, we'd like to get paid FMLA up from 6 weeks to 8 weeks. Third, we are considering whether or not MAPC should make an employer's contribution to the state's 457 retirement system, which members of our staff can, at their own choosing, contribute to. I know that I have contributed to it for many years. Employers sometimes contribute to that as well. We have not, but we're looking into that possibility. Those are probably the main things we're still looking at right now. That $102,000, I believe you find under employee benefit improvement, gives us some opportunity to do that within the budget that's here. All the changes we've made already are no longer in employee benefit improvement, but are actually in the benefits line item. I think those are the main points I wanted to make. And one more point about our lease. We are re-signing a lease for 60 Temple Place, I believe, in August. It is still an open question whether or not we will take any additional space in the building. I don't think we will, but it is still a possibility because our staff continues to increase in size. We are also receiving from the landlord a $400,000 tenant improvement allowance as part of that lease signing, which will enable us to modernize some of our space. $400,000, as many of you know, if you own a home and you've done any redecorating, it doesn't get you all that far anymore, but it will be used to improve the space to make it more commodious for members of the staff and more appropriate with the post-COVID, largely hybrid environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And I'll just close by saying, first of all, my thanks to everybody who helped me understand this. First of all, first and foremost, Anna, who has spent so long pulling this budget together and has just been great. Mark and Lizzie, of course, all the work they've done to pull the budget together, but also to help me and the Finance Committee get up to speed. The Finance Committee, Tabor Keeley, Yolanda Greaves, and myself met in earlier May. We reviewed all this and we reported it out favorably with a recommendation to you, the Executive Committee, with the hope that you would report it out favorably to the full council. And that concludes my report. I have barking dogs, so I'll put myself on mute at this point. Thank you all.
Question from Colette. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Erin, is that okay with you?
Yeah, I did have a question in terms of benefits improvements. Are you considering I'm not sure retention bonus is the right word for it, but if someone's been an employee for a certain level of time, that there is some sort of a bonus that they get for being, 10 years, whatever you think the goal is, as opposed to vacation. I know that there are generational differences between what employees are looking for in terms of, I think the younger generation is certainly looking for more personal time rather than remuneration. But if you're looking to retain staff but keep the working hours, I was just curious if you were considering something like that.
Yes, we actually have implemented something like that, Colette. It's modest, but I'll ask Angela to talk a little bit about the program that we have to offer some benefits to people when they cross a major threshold of tenure at MAPC. Recently, Martin crossed the threshold of 40 years. We don't expect most people to remain for 40 years, but we are giving people a modest acknowledgement. Angela, do you want to say a little bit about that program?
Oh, sure, I'd love to. So I'm just looking for my cheat sheet as we're talking. So we created what I affectionately call our service awards, and it is a retention, and it's to recognize people at the 1, 3, 5, 7. 1, 3, 5, 10, 15, 20, and increments of 5 after that. And like Mark said, it's a modest amount of money, but we really do try to reach the 1, 3, and 5 year folks to incentivize them. And then the folks who have dedicated their time to public service, working here at MAPC, we do go out of our way to actually give a monetary award and also a small gesture of a gift, very modest. But last year was our inaugural year where we had an actual full program, and we were able to, and I from all accounts, that feedback that I've gotten, that folks really appreciate it. The folks who've been here for 5, 10, 15 years, 20, 40 years in the case of Martin, really appreciated us taking the time to appreciate them. So last year we had a soft launch the year during COVID, but it was different because it wasn't in person. But the most recent ceremony was in person, and I had many folks who had been here for quite some time let me know how appreciated they felt by being recognized for working here at MAPC. It actually turned out to be very successful.
Thank you.
So I wanted to just say one more thing, which is to give us, I thank Anna, the finance staff, and the finance committee. I didn't thank Elizabeth, who has done a tremendous amount of work on this budget. As some people know, I was out of the country at the end of April for a couple of weeks, which was the critical time for finalizing the revenue budget. And this year, Lizzie went through every single line item, every single contract in the revenue budget. Some of you have seen those pages of the revenue budget. First, they went from letter to legal, then they went from 1 legal to 6 legal, and then we finally gave up on it and said, okay, we'll just use these as working documents. We're not going to submit the entire document to the committees. But we go through every single revenue line item that we get from directors, and we kick the tires, we test it. We spend much more time on the in budget than we do on the out budget, to be perfectly frank. And Lizzie really did all of that with Anna this year, and I wanted to give her a special thank you for doing that.
Thanks, Mark.
And with that, I think I've concluded, the treasurer has concluded his report on the FY25 budget. Procedurally, do we vote on this now? That's the question. And perhaps I hand this back to President Aaron for that process. So if that's okay.
That is fine. Thank
I
you,
will hand this
Sam. Thank
back to
you. Everyone who's already been thanked, obviously, we appreciate each and every one of your efforts in this. I would say that I am looking for 2 different things. So first, I will accept a motion to accept the treasurer's report for the consent agenda. So let's do that first, please. Anyone want to come off mute and?
So moved. It's Tom.
Second. Okay, great. So motion made by Tom Daniel, second made by Tabor. that item is now on the consent agenda. Next order of business, I would say, is, and Mark, just correct me, which I'm sure you will, if I am incorrect here. Now I'm looking for a favorable recommendation to the full council for the FY25 MAPC agency budget.
So move.
Love the thumbs
Second.
up. All right. Motion made by Mo, second made by Tabor. Is that correct, Tabor? Nope. Who did it? Keith?
I did.
Oh, okay. Imai. You're over here. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for that. So motion made, motion made by Mo, second made by Imai. Thank you so much for that. Roll call is going to be required for this, and we're going to do that right now. Again, the motion before us, I'm looking for my attendance sheet here. Motion before us is to forward to vote on a favorable recommendation to the full council for its adoption at the Tuesday, June 4th annual council meeting. So if everyone could come off mute, please. And here we go. Imai.
Aye.
Colette.
Aye.
Kurt.
Aye.
Keith.
Aye.
Karen.
Aye.
Jen.
Aye.
Tom Daniel.
Aye.
John. Thomas. Mo.
Yes.
Sagoon. Jared. Tabor.
Yes.
Angie. Gina. Steve Olenoff.
Aye.
Courtney. Vandana.
Aye.
Claire.
Aye.
Sam.
Aye.
Steve Silvera.
Aye.
Juan.
Aye.
Elaine.
Aye.
And Erin. Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions, and thank you so much for the work done. I look forward to the full council adopting this next week at the June 4th annual council meeting. So thank you so much for that. Next up on the agenda is the executive director's report. I have on my agenda that Lizzie is going to be speaking on it, but I see Mark here. So I'm going to call him Mark.
Yeah, I think that might be left over from the last executive
Okay.
committee meeting when I was away. I've been away a lot lately, on both business and pleasure. So I'm not going to take much time with the ED report for two reasons. First, because I actually have a 1 p.m. meeting that I need to go to, so I'll have to leave probably during the legislative report. But secondly, because I really do want to leave time for the legislative committee report. There's a lot going on with budgets having come out of the House and Senate. And I believe we have a bus lane item to take up as well. So the executive director's report has been sent to everyone. I hope people like this new system of, we do have an executive director's report every month, but it tends to be 8 or 9 pages rather than 36 pages long. Yes, big thumbs up from Tabor. Believe me, it's made my weekends a little better too, because I tend to do the executive director's report on the weekend, and I don't know how I ever did 36-page reports. I want to emphasize one particular thing, which is our work in digital equity. This has really exploded, I think is the term that I would use. Sam relayed this a little bit during his budget presentation. The digital equity work at MAPC is a joint undertaking of the Data Services Department, particularly or under the direction of our digital services manager, Steve Larrick, and his team, and the Municipal Collaboration Department under the leadership of Brian Luther, our Municipal Services Manager. Their teams have grown in size, and they will grow further in size during FY25. There is a tremendous amount of funding from federal sources that are funneled to us mainly through the Mass Broadband Institute that we can use for two primary activities. The first of which is to help cities and towns to develop digital equity plans and then to begin to implement those plans. We've done that in Somerville. We've done that in Quincy. We're doing that in a number of other communities, more than I can remember, to be perfectly honest. The second activity, and the one that is more money, is to actually work with lower income communities. And particularly, we are working with housing authorities and nonprofit developers to make sure that those housing developments are hooked up to the internet. We buy the equipment, we purchase the connectivity, and we build capacity with the residents for the use of those systems. That is by far the most expensive activity. One of the things we've learned is the procurement statutes, which were written and adopted prior to the existence of the word Wi-Fi, believe it or not, were not suitable for this work. They required at least 3 separate procurements for every community we were working with. And that was inefficient and expensive in a variety of ways. We're seeking to get the law changed in order to be able to have a more modern procurement system for internet connectivity. But in the meantime, we've gotten a state agency, and Lizzie will remind me which one it is, to declare MAPC to be their agent in this work, and therefore to be able to go through the state procurement processes rather than the municipal procurement processes, which are considerably easier to use.
It's Mass Broadband.
It is MBI. Okay,
Yes.
fine. Very good. I didn't know if it was MBI or if it was with whatever executive office is over MBI. That's what I wasn't sure of. So we're already trying to improve that system. I really want to congratulate Steve and Brian for continuing to work on this. Their teams, their supervisors, Jesse and Amy. I would never have anticipated, like 5 years ago, Lizzie and I, if you asked, do you want to work on digital equity, we would have said, sure, we'll probably do a little bit. But we would never have anticipated that it would become as dominant a program area as it is. But we take advantage of opportunities here at MAPC, and this opportunity has presented itself. And in fact, we're having a first meeting next week to discuss the issue of how are we going to keep this work going after the federal funds run out? And that's an important conversation. We don't want to wait until 2 months before the funds run out before we discuss that internally with Mass Broadband and with our cities and towns. So that's really the big point I wanted to make this month in my report, and I'll put a close on it there, Erin.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Any questions from anyone? Okay, great. Thank you so much. Next up is the report of the Legislative Committee. I'm going to call on Legislative Committee Chair Keith Bergman. Keith, take it away.
Thanks, Erin. Keith Bergman reporting from Cape Cod. Just came over from Nantucket to go from one meeting to the next. So welcome to summer. The Legislative Committee met on May 8th and recommended the action item on your agenda today, which is Senate 2600, an act relative to school bus safety. We recommend that the Executive Committee support this bill. And we also have been hearing quite a number of updates on the House and now Senate consideration of the state budget. We're waiting with bated breath for the Affordable Homes Act to next be debated in the House. And it's a very busy time. Just this morning, at 8 o'clock, there was a Magic Subregion call with Georgia Barlow and Matt Walsh, and meeting with a bunch of us who chair Municipal Affordable Housing Trust in the Magic Subregion, and there are about 10 communities represented to hear about the Affordable Homes Act and what we can do to get that across the finish line. So I am looking.
You're looking for who to turn it to.
On the call.
I'm going to have you turn it to me for just a quick second, Keith. It's Lizzie.
Okay, all right. Thanks so much, Lizzie. Appreciate the work of the full government affairs team. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm a little bit pinch hitting for Leah because she's under the weather today. She has caught a cold from her toddler. So I'm just going to kick it over to Georgia to talk a little bit about the issue for discussion and vote today. And then Norman, I'll talk a little bit about what's happening inside the State House and some of these moving pieces that Keith was mentioning. Just a little bit of background on the issue that we're talking about today. We sent out a memo with some of the background on this bill. We have actually been considering this legislation for a very long time. It's come up at MAPC for many, many years. And in fact, the very first draft of this memo was actually written by Kasha Hart, who worked on the MAPC government affairs team, I think like 2.5, 3 years ago. So sort of in the middle of the pandemic, and we ended up not taking up this issue because it was supposed to come, I think, right around the start of the pandemic. But it hasn't gone away, and our cities and towns are really concerned about bus lane enforcement. And we've gotten some requests for us to weigh in and take a position, particularly about some ways that we can think about making some of the legislation stronger. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Georgia, who can present on the bill and offer it up for discussion and vote today.
Thanks, Lizzie and Keith. Yeah, as Lizzie mentioned, this is something we have heard about for a while now. The name an act relative to school bus safety is not necessarily the full scope of what is in this bill. It involves both school bus safety and enforcement, as well as MBTA and RTA bus lane enforcement. This bill, Senate Bill 2600, is actually kind of a combination that came out of the Joint Transportation Committee, combining some of these different bus safety bills that emerged this session. So that's why it might feel a little like there's a lot happening, here. But we would like to get involved and provide some feedback on this bill to the State House, because as Lizzie mentioned, we've been hearing from cities and towns that have implemented these bus lanes that there's often misuse. There's other cars driving, there's often Uber and Lyft deliveries parked in the bus lanes, which makes them inoperable and makes it hard to get buses to bus stops and in those bus lanes on time. And it's hard to maintain like that consistent enforcement from just like police or other traffic enforcement. So this bill would allow the MBTA and RTAs to install cameras on the actual buses themselves, so that they can take photos as they're driving of cars that are currently parked in the bus lane, although we would recommend that also it would be able to capture those who are driving in the bus lanes, and administer a small fine to ensure that people are not misusing the bus lanes. In other cities and states that have implemented this, New York, Philly have them, there's actually a really small recidivism rate. So the goal here isn't necessarily to continue to fine people and make money off of these, but really to do that enforcement so that the bus lanes can be used for what they're there for, and getting people on public transit from one place to another quickly, on time, and without those other cars in the way. In addition to that, there's this school bus safety component, which some of our communities on the North Shore, both Peabody and now Salem, is starting a school bus safety pilot program. And we're finding that there's a lot of violations around school buses. So when those flashing stop signs go out in the school bus, people are just driving right around. And so this would also give towns and municipalities the ability to install cameras on the school buses so that we can do a similar thing there. Not necessarily looking at bus lanes for school buses, but enforcement of that safety mechanism to ensure that students and pedestrians are able to get on and off the buses safely, get to and from school in that way as well. One of the recommendations we have with this bill is that school buses also be able to, clarifying that school buses can use bus lanes as well, so that we can make it easier for students to get to and from school on time. But I think we see this as a really important bill to ensure that when we are working with cities to put in new bus lanes, that there's actually a way to ensure that they're being used effectively. It's an incentive to create more dedicated bus lanes throughout the region and ensure that people, without adding undue burden on people who may be in those bus lanes, seeing that there is that low recidivism rate going forward. So with this bill as written, we do have some recommendations that are that we have been talking with some both advocates about and some legislators about, that we would want to see some improvements to the legislation. But we think that it's important that MAPC be involved in this discussion going forward this session and likely in future legislative sessions as well. See, there's a question from Mo.
Yes. May I speak? Just a question. Is there any resistance to this? And if so, what is the basis? Seems like a logical.
So some of the things that had to get worked out at first, there were some concerns about data protection for automatic enforcement, the cameras, and the how is that being administered? At this point, the language included in the bill has been that we've worked with the ACLU, who sees their protections and data protections as like we've hit that standard. So I think that that is not a concern anymore, but I know that was something in the beginning, as well as the scale of the fines and fees. So not trying to necessarily make money off of this, but really just make sure that these are being used in an appropriate way, and ensuring that people aren't repeatedly hit with large scale fees if that's untenable for lower income folks who may be caught in some of these. So I think some of those concerns have been worked out, but that was some of the initial resistance to the legislation. I don't know if there's anything else anyone on the GA team would want to add. Let's see. No.
Thank you.
Georgia, I have a question. So what's the experience in other places who have implemented this technology? Where is the problem of the delivery vehicles being pushed to? It's being pushed out of the bus lane and the bus stops. Where's it going, and what's the sort of, what are the what are the consequences of this?
It's an interesting question. I know exactly where those delivery vehicles in particular are moving to. I know that in the cities that have started this automatic enforcement, they've seen even higher rates than they expected of violations in the bus lane. So I think they've been able to move faster through those lanes now that there is some enforcement mechanism. I am not sure about that delivery piece, though. That is something we can follow up about. I mean, at the moment, one of the other bills that we are working on this session is to have requirements for that data collection of where those rapid deliveries are happening now, because we don't actually, like someone like Uber Eats or Grubhub doesn't currently report where they're picking up and dropping off those rapid deliveries. So I think that we might start to get a better sense of that in the future anyway, but at the moment, I'm not sure where they are going. Lizzie, I saw you came off mute.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think it's a really good question. I do think kind of related to this rapid deliveries piece that Georgia was just mentioning, I think we're starting to hear from some of our communities that they'd love our help actually having them think through like where deliveries, like designated delivery zones. And that would actually be a way for communities to think through, as opposed to like how it's always been where like delivery, especially in like very dense urban settings where delivery trucks are just kind of pulling over because they have to like drop something off, actually creating like designated delivery and pickup zones. I can tell you for sure that some major Asian cities have done this very successfully, like Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Bangkok all actually have like very specific designated delivery zones, to the point where there's even usually like porters at those designated delivery zones to get even very large deliveries inside stores. So I think there's like a lot of room there to think about that. It's harder in Massachusetts, especially when like every single one of our town centers has like a town center where these things, where like all the same pickups and drop-offs are happening at the same time. So I think that's like ripe for kind of more consideration and work, but I do think some of these questions will be taken up alongside some of the rapid delivery questions.
Yeah, I mean, just one thing to think about is I'm curious if it's going to push more deliveries to e-bikes, which are going on the sidewalks, which hurt pedestrians, which we're seeing in other big cities, but just something to think about.
Almost all of these bus lanes are bus bike. And so actually some of those e-bikes would actually have greater protection as well. And again, that's something that we'd be borrowing from many major European and Asian cities who've actually already undertaken that. I see hands. I see more hands. I see Imai. Do you want to go? And then Sam.
Yeah. Kind of related to the studies you were talking about this, Lizzie. Didn't our MPO do like a future of the curb study a while back, like 2-3 years back, that could inform some of this stuff? Has that been rolled into this at all, or was it at all informative to it?
That again, so yes. The short answer is yes. We have done a lot of work around future of the curb. It's like some of my favorite work at MAPC. It's like, so only like a wonky group like us could do that. And yes, I definitely feel like all of those things are being taken into consideration alongside some of the rapid delivery questions. And I think some of the ways, the fact that the bill actually didn't move a couple of years ago, that work has definitely informed some of what we're doing right now with this legislation. I actually think it'll end up in a stronger place because of some of that work.
So two questions. One is a double part. First question is, would this operate 24 hours a day, or is it just certain hours of the day? And then the second question is, what about dropping off elderly, disabled, children, etc., kind of that portion of it? How would that be addressed or thought about?
So it would be operating at all hours, like with the bus lane. Part of this technology requires that someone actually review the photos that are taken of and the videos of the violation, so that there is some space for, there are some opportunities where there's a reason that someone may be in a dedicated bus lane. I think it would depend a little bit on how we define what that looks like. At the moment, those types of drop-offs are not necessarily included in this list. There are reasons like moving out of the way of an emergency vehicle, funeral processions, like some of those are explicitly named in this version of the bill. But I think that opportunity could exist still for those exceptions to be made, particularly in light of someone having to physically review each violation to ensure that it's appropriate and actually a violation, and not just someone taking a right turn or something like that got caught in the way of the camera.
Okay. Great. Any other questions or comments? Okay, great. Yes, Karen.
I was just curious, is there any component in the bill for public education?
So that's not explicitly named in this bill, but like everyone we've spoken to that would be a part of this, is like that rollout of that implementation of this would involve a public education component to ensure that people understand what the new regulations are and what those expectations are. But I think that's something we could recommend that gets more explicitly named, and so that there is no unintended consequences there.
Exactly. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone. So I guess the question before us is whether or not the executive committee would like to adopt the recommendation of the legislative committee as described in their memo.
So moved by Keith.
Yep, thank you, Keith. A motion made by Keith. Is there a second?
Second.
I saw Kurt's hand first. I saw your paw, so I'll give the second to Kurt. So if everyone could come off mute. I know we all love the consent agenda, but when it comes to legislative items, I think it's important to vote one by one. Sound good? All right, here we go. Imai.
Aye.
Colette.
Aye.
Kurt. Just yell really loud from
Aye.
Keith,
Aye.
Karen,
Yes.
Jen,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
Mo,
Yes.
Tabor,
Yes.
Steve O,
Aye.
Vandana,
Abstain.
Claire,
Aye.
Sam,
Aye.
Steve S,
Aye.
Juan,
Abstain.
Elaine,
Abstain.
and Erin. Aye. Motion carries with Vandana, Juan, and Elaine abstaining. Thank you so much, Legislative Committee, and thank you so much, staff, for assisting in that. Really appreciate it. Okay, great. Lizzie, is there any other business not known at the time of posting this agenda?
I was going to see if Norman could just give a brief update of where things are in the session, because there's a lot of places where I think it would be helpful for folks to just weigh in with legislators to kind of get some things across the finish line. And I think Norman, he does not usually talk as fast as I do, but I know he can be quick.
I'll be very, very brief. We are just over 60 days left in the legislative session, I believe. And in that time, we still need to pass a budget, Affordable Homes Act, Municipal Empowerment Act, Economic Development Bond Bill, IT Bond Bill, possibly an environmental climate bill. Am I missing any other big bills here, team? So that's 6 big bills, basically 10, every 10 days that they're gonna have to get done. So that's a lot. We will definitely be relying on a lot of you all to weigh in on these bills with your legislators if you feel comfortable doing so. And maybe even if you don't, we might try and push you a little bit. We're here to support and helpful on that side. One of the biggest things that we've recently, as you may have heard, Senate concluded budget debate last Friday morning. Fire alarm went off right as they were about to conclude, so it pushed it even later. I think the big thing to note there is both the House and Senate budgets are around $58 billion. The big news out of the Senate side is that GAP, or as Mark, the augmented DLTA funding was included in the Senate budget for the first time. We also got a technical fix to the previous budget that would allow us to use last year's GAP funding for state and federal grants. So that will hopefully provide some opportunity for us to work with all of your communities to make sure we're positioning you all as best as possible to go after some of that transformative federal funding. Possibly one of the other parts that could be of interest to groups here is that the minimum aid was increased in the Senate budget to $110 per student. I know that there's been a lot of conversation around both that and Chapter 70, and there'll actually be a Chapter 70 task force to make recommendations for updating calculations required for local contributions, among another wide range of issues. So I imagine that's something that will be taken up next legislative session once those recommendations are released. The Senate budget also had a lot of funding for childcare and education, which is going to run headlong into the House's recommendation for increased funding for transportation. So a lot of priorities that need funding, not as much money as we would hope to go around to fund all of those things that are needed. So a conference committee will be appointed in a matter of days, I would imagine, for them to flush out those differences. And hopefully we will get a budget on time this year, which would be end of June. But again, as many of you know who've probably worked in the space for a while, we probably shouldn't hold our breath on that. We always usually run a little bit late. Happy to take any questions or talk about any of the other bills as folks may have questions here.
Anyone with questions? Norman, that was near Lizzie's speed. That was great.
Thanks so much. And please feel free to send questions via email or call, text, whatever. We're always happy to be helpful to y'all whenever you have questions.
Yes,
Great.
you know where to find us.
Yes.
I think I'll just, put a fine point on some of what Norman was talking about, the Municipal Empowerment Act. There's just not a ton of people advocating for that legislation, and I think it really would help cities and towns. So adding your voice to that would be great. And then Erin, if I may, the only other thing I wanted to let folks know is that our council meeting is on Tuesday. Our quorum count is quite low, so please reach out to folks in your communities to ask them to register, and please also register yourselves. Without actually quorum at this meeting, we can't vote on our budget and we can't hold our elections. So those are two really critical pieces that we need as many people as possible to go. So even if you can't go, you can send your alternate or designee if you're in an ex officio seat, but please, please, please try to encourage as many people to come as possible. If you are interested or available to even make calls to some of your municipal colleagues, I can connect you directly with Sasha, and she can give you even a short list of just 5 folks that you might know to reach out to, either via email or on the phone, to encourage attendance.
You, Lizzie, and it's in person, so.
And it's in person. It's going to be really fun. Plus you can get like a museum tour.
Yeah. Let's all hang out. I know it's a busy time of year, but this is really important. So please, 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 make time to attend if you are able to. And make sure if you are in a city and town, making sure that if there's a delegate who cannot attend, making sure that an alternate is appointed as well, who is able to attend. That's pretty important. So thank you so much for that. Is there anything else, Lizzie?
I see a hand from Imai. I don't know if that's.
Oh, I'm sorry, Imai.
Yeah. Could someone put the Municipal Empowerment Act bill number and maybe even a link if you can in the chat so we can click it before we adjourn?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good thinking. Thank you so much. Okay, so with that, I am going to ask for a motion to accept the consent agenda and to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Motion made by Tom Daniel. Who's going to second?
Second.
All right, Imai. Thank you so much. So second made by Imai. Last time, come off mute, please. And here we go. Imai.
Aye.
Colette.
Aye.
Kurt.
Aye.
Keith.
Aye.
Karen.
Aye.
Jen.
Aye.
Tom.
Aye.
Mo.
Yes.
Tabor.
Aye.
Steve O.
Aye.
Vandana.
Aye.
Claire.
Aye.
Sam.
Aye.
Steve. Yes.
Aye.
Juan.
Aye.
Elaine.
Aye.
And Erin. Aye. Thank you so much, everyone. I hopefully will see all of you in person, and the meeting is adjourned at 12:50 p.m. Thanks, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
I'd be happy to look at a list of people to call to come to the meeting.
Oh, fabulous.
Somebody
Thank you
wants
so
to
much.
email that to me, I'll do it.
Thank you so